wonderful speaker today. So Carla Torgerson is 20 years or more, I don't know, I don't believe it, but anyway, experience as an instructional designer and strategist. She's head of learning experience strategy at Torrance Learning, and we've had Megan Torrance as a speaker here. So she works on complex client projects and delivers solutions for learners and the business. Author blogs, articles, lots of topics, e-learning, mobile learning, and microlearning, which you'll be hearing from her about today. She developed the microlearning design model, which I think is great that you have a design model for that. And she's written books on the topic. They're listed in the description for today's session if you want to look at those. And today she's our speaker. So welcome, Carla. It's all yours. Let's get going.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Really excited to be here. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think Kathleen just wanted to do a quick check that you can see it okay.
Yeah,
it's good.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Just super excited to be here. Like I said, my name is Carla Torgerson, and as Kathleen mentioned, there we go. I am the head of learning experience strategy at Torrance Learning. Contact information is there if anybody is interested, if you will have questions later or whatever. So just a little bit about me. I have, as Kathleen mentioned, I have a long history in the instructional design space, and I've worked in both the consulting space and in large organizations. So I kind of understand both sides of that desk. And right now, as it says here on the screen, I lead learning experience strategy at Torrance Learning. We do custom e-learning, virtual instructor-led, and other forms of learning as well, but e-learning, micro-learning, that's really our sweet spot. And if you're looking for a little credibility, I have written a couple of books on the topic and actually chapters in these ones as well. So, but now that you got to know me, I want to take a moment to get to know you. So what we're going to do is we are going to use our annotation tools in Zoom. I'm going to ask you to just scroll up to the top of your screen there, and you'll see your controls. Make sure to turn on, and I'm doing the same, turn on your annotation toolbar. And then you should be able to click on annotate, and I want you to click on your stamp tool. All right, so I want you to have your stamper turned on. And then my question is, of these, which are your role or roles? Are you a learning technologist, oops, wrong direction, trainer, learning leader, and or instructional designer? And again, you may have more than one, and that's why we're using the stamper tool. That's totally cool. Yeah, and draw however you like to put your mark on my slides here. Please go ahead, feel free. So we're seeing some IDs, learning technology, trainer, learning. We've got everything represented, but heavier weighting to the instructional design, which was what I was expecting, and excellent because it fits well with this topic. Now, my next question, I'm going to clear all those drawings. And I'm going to just ask you another question. What's your level of experience with training and development? Go ahead, grab your stamper tool. This is training and development in general. So 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 5 to 9, or 10 plus years. Again, use your stamper or draw in there, however you like to engage. And I know we've got a fairly small group, so we won't get tons of stamps, but it'll be nice and colorful here. All right. Well, this is great. We've got lots of experience here, which is fantastic, because I love when people have lots of experience, because then they can help me to, ask good questions. We can challenge the content, all of that as well. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and it is this one. My next question is, how much experience do you have with micro learning specifically? I'm going to clear all those drawings again. Go ahead, stamp on this one. None, a little, quite a bit, or a lot. This is kind of your 4 scale here.
Yeah.
Great, great. So, okay, so this is great. We now know we've got tons of experience from L&D in the room here. And we've got a nice gradation as well. So what I'm looking for is those who have only a little experience, speak up, right? There are no bad questions, and I want to hear every one of them. And those of us who have a lot of experience, let's be challenging the content, ask questions, share things, and help us all grow and learn. And I will tell you that, in fact, you'll see some of the content in today's session is stuff that I've presented many times, but I've actually got some new stuff in here. So I'm actually looking for a lot of feedback as well as we go through today's session. And Kathleen, just to confirm, as I recall, we have until 1:45, but we can stay until the top of the hour with questions. But you're expecting me to be finished by 1:45, is that right?
We need to wrap up by 1, but a lot of people are scheduling us during their lunch break. Those of us on the left side of the country, and so they probably want to finish it sometime between 12:45 and 1.
Awesome.
But if if you start getting on a roll and people start asking questions, we can certainly go past 12:45. Don't worry about it.
Okay, awesome. And I've got my chat open as well, so please, if you've got questions along the way, just shout out or throw it in the chat, and we will also answer all your questions. All right, so what are we going to do today? I actually have quite a bit, and I'm going to kind of go through some parts a little faster than others, especially given the level of experience in the room. But we're going to quickly talk about what is microlearning, so we're all on the same page. I have a model that I personally really like about the 4 uses of microlearning. We'll talk about those use cases. We'll see just a couple of examples. We'll talk about how that translates into 20 ways that you can use microlearning. And then we'll talk about how we're really making that learner-centered. And like I said, learner-centeredness is actually a really big interest area of mine and has been for many years. I had the lucky opportunity to work at Allen Interactions, where Michael Allen was the leader, or still actually is, if you're familiar with some of his work in the e-learning space. And he's really big on learner-centeredness. So I kind of cut my teeth there, 15 or 20 years ago. And now I'm trying to bring that learner centricity into microlearning. So I've got some questions and ideas to share with you guys there too. So my ultimate goal, though, is in about 35 or 40 minutes, you are going to leave this session empowered to capitalize on microlearning to improve performance in your organization, right? And you guys are ISPI, so you know all about performance improvement, right? That's really our goal here. So just really quick, what is microlearning? I think we're getting more and more kind of coalesced around a definition as an industry, but for me personally, it is content that's been purposely shortened to enable the learner to fit learning and to fit learning within their work and personal lives. I think that personal lives piece is becoming a really big deal more and more. And of course, there was a time early on that we said this pandemic we were all going to go back to normal, and we now know that the new normal is here. Right? Yeah, thanks, Miller. Yeah, exactly, right? So just really quick, I always like to include this slide even in my shortest presentations, because I think everything old is new again. All this talk about microlearning, we've talked about a lot of these same ideas from a long time ago. And so this is the amazing wrist radio, which costs $298. And here is the new and improved wrist radio, which is just a little more than $298, right?
Yeah.
And so my point is specifically that in many ways, I don't think anything I'm going to share today is new. I think this is all founded on layers of educational work from, over the last 100 years. But we're taking it and we're being a lot more focused and purposeful with micro these days. So I like to think about microlearning in 4 use cases. So for me, this is actually really important because every time I talk to somebody about microlearning, they all say they're going micro. They all say they're using microlearning or they want to go micro. They're all talking about different things. And so I'm going to share with you, for me, my model the 4 uses of microlearning and also their common names. I'll go through them relatively quickly because I think an experienced group like this probably has a good sense of them. And then I'm going to ask you to use your stamper tools. Those who have been doing micro, you can show me where you've been going micro. So the first one is preparation. This is anytime you're using microlearning before long form instruction, like an e-learning or a virtual instructor-led class, or even an instructor-led. The next is follow-up. That comes after longer form instruction. Then we've got standalone, which a lot of people, that's what I think people think of when they think micro is, those things that you might see on YouTube or on LinkedIn or something like that. They can also, of course, be on our LMSs. And then we have support materials, things that you go to like just in time or as performance support. And so, of course, the common names that you're probably familiar with is PreWork is the stuff we do before a class, right? Follow-up, we call that boost learning. Standalone, I don't have a good name, so I just call it short form learning. And then we've got performance support. And so what I'd like you to do is go ahead, grab your annotation tool again, and can you stamp on or draw on my diagram to show me any of the areas that you have been working in so far? Oh, I love it. I love it. We're seeing lots of variation here. This is great.
One question would be, what is a micro? How many minutes of the video qualifies as macro as opposed to micro?
Sure, it's a great question, John. So a lot of people have kind of varying definitions, but most people coalesce around somewhere around 10 minutes or less. Now, for me, I actually think it depends which of these ones you're doing. So for example, PreWork, it might be in that 10-minute range. Your boost learning, though, the research actually tells us you're aiming for 30 seconds to a minute. Those are really, really super short. The standalone is a lot of people, the research is that if you're doing informal learning, stuff where people can pick and choose what they take, a lot of people look to a maximum of about 4 minutes. But I think when you go corporate, it gets longer. I think you're looking around 8 to 10. And then performance support is sort of in that really short, if it's at a glance, you're using it in the flow of work, or it could be up to maybe 5 or 10 minutes if it's workflow learning, or performance support. And I'm sorry, I do have a slide for that, but I hid it because I wasn't planning to talk about timing. But yes, absolutely, it's like that 0 to 10 minute range. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, it did, because I was considering 10 minutes as a long video, and I've gone more toward 3 minutes or shorter. Yes, agreed. And we know actually that when learners have the choice, when they are looking at they do a Google search, or they look on even on their own internal platforms, they will gravitate towards those things that are 4 minutes or less. That's what the research tells us. And so again, if we're looking at things that are optional, they will gravitate there. And of course, in my opinion, we should be trying to get there as well, even if we're requiring it. Yeah. Any other questions about either the types of microlearning or seat time or any of that?
I'm thinking that microlearning can also be a PDF or a step-by-step recipe card kind of resource. Those sorts of things that, okay, you took the training, but it was a month ago, and you're not quite sure about the third and fourth step or the 17th and 18th step in the process, and you need something to jog your memory, and something like that, I think, just fills the bill. I'm also thinking that chatbots and stuff like that could also be used that way too.
Yeah, so Miller, you must be psychic, because I actually have a few slides about the different formats we can use.
Okay.
So a lot of what you're talking about there is the performance support lane, right? Like, how are we helping people when they forget something?
Right, but it could also be It could be standalone in terms of,
yeah,
you got to do this task and you've never learned about it. Watch this and or read this or
absolutely.
whatever, and you can at least try it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Let's parking lot that just for a moment, because I'll show you how to me, there's at least 5 different formats you can use. When you cross those with these, we come up with a nice blend of options. So yeah, you must be psychic. No. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, John.
Another question. I develop a lot of online learning, a slide-based online learning, and then embedded in a slide, I will have a video. If motion is important, I will include a video that may go 30 seconds or at most a minute or two. Is that considered micro-learning, or is that more just part of online learning?
Well, and John, I think the question is how long is the overall piece? Is it part of it like a 30-minute e-learning, or is it?
It's self-paced, so it may be anywhere from 10 minutes to 40 minutes or even an hour, depending on how deep into it. Very often there are paths included where the learner self-selects how much of it they need.
Yeah. So I've seen people doing that. And in fact, I've got an example as well, sort of similar, where we were we made these tiny bite-sized pieces up to 7 minutes, usually 3 to 7. But then we layered them together and people could pick and choose which parts they wanted. And I think depending how you use it, you can call that micro-learning. I've got it as an example here for sure. I think if you're expecting somebody to take all of the parts, that's probably just more like really good chunked instruction that they can come and go from. But if they're able to pick and choose those pieces, and they might take one chunk today and another chunk 2 weeks from now, I think that's a really great example of micro-learning for sure. Yeah.
And that would certainly be better instructional design to spread out the learning so the brain can absorb it as they go along.
Of course. Yep. And the repetition and
all of the stuff,
right? As we said, everything old is new again, right? It's absolutely.
I lean very much towards the way John characterized it, because everything's in a context, and in the world today, we've taken a lot of classroom courses and delivered them online, but more so, we've identified the kinds of specific needs people have to learn X, Y, or Z, and built a solution to help them get that that's relatively short compared to how it used to be taking that same structure and putting it into a classroom setting. And so I think one of the critical elements is, can you define what the specific kind of learning goal of the person is that can be reduced into a micro format, whether it's 7 minutes or 20 minutes?
Yeah. And I think to your point, Erwin, especially now, I think when we all flip to being virtual, people are like, oh, no commute times, things are going to be easier, and we're going to have so much more time. No.
Just more Zoom meetings.
Right? Yeah, right? No, yeah. So I think we're actually looking more than ever to compartmentalize our bits of learning and get just what we need. I agree 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and a good example of that, I think, would be Khan Academy, where you can take a whole course in 5 to 10 minute segments.
Yep.
Yes. And actually, my favorite in that sort of space as well is Duolingo, where you can learn a language in as little as 5 minutes a day, right? Sort of that same concept, right? You keep coming back for a little more. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for drawing on my screen. I'm glad to see that we've got lots of examples, people doing stuff. And I said in my description that I'd show some examples. I'm going to do that very, very quickly because I actually want to get to the next part, which is really what we've been talking about more. So let me just clear those drawings. There we go. So like I said, there's 4 uses for pre-work. You could do like a short little e-learning. This is one we did that came it was like a 3-minute commercial for the e-learning that they were actually going to take. The program actually had 4 30-minute segments that they were going to take over the period of 2 months. So every 2 weeks, they'd have another 30-minute chunk. This was the micro piece, which really served as kind of almost the advertising, the WIFM, right, that came before. For follow-up, you're probably very familiar with the idea of sending emails that can remind the learner of content. Again, you don't need to read them, but that's kind of the concept there. You can also do that by text. A lot of people are using, Teams messages, lots of stuff like that. For short form learning, this is actually the example I was telling you about, John. We actually did a whole series. We call it Eleventure. It's some materials we've created where we take a topic, in this case, it's diversity and inclusion, and we've cut it into really tiny pieces that people might be interested in one of. And then they can pick and choose which pieces, but if they wanted to string several together, they could make a 30-minute course, but every single one of them is, a peppy 3 to 7 minute video. And of course, you could do more standalone e-learning. It doesn't have to be video based. And then for performance support, we actually did a really interesting piece. I don't have permissions to show it, but what we did was we created a on-the-job support tool where it was basically in the flow of work that we had these marketers who had to create marketing plans. It was actually a tool that stepped them through the process of creating the marketing plan. And along the side, there was examples and ways you could reach for help and stuff like that. But it had you walking through basically an online electronic form that guided you through the whole process. So that's kind of all 4 of the kinds. Any questions about those? Otherwise, I'm going to show you the different formats we can go as well.
Yes. What software did you use to embed the microlearning?
Yeah, so oftentimes what we are creating is stuff that ends up on an LMS. So we often, if we're doing videos, we're finding many of the videos we're doing are getting wrapped in Rise. They're being put into Rise so we can get a SCORM wrapper on them. But this particular example, the performance support, as you're probably aware, rarely lives on an LMS, and we actually have it running off of a web server. And so that one was built with, I think it's HTML5.
All right. And did you use Rise as the authoring tool for that?
For the videos themselves, we, for example, wrong direction. With these videos, we're actually filming them in our own studio and then editing them with video editing software. I believe it's an Adobe product.
Okay, so that sounds a bit proprietary.
No, we're just using standard video editing. I think it's Adobe Premiere is what we're using to edit our videos.
Okay, but that's just the editing portion, though, isn't it? You're going to take that video and put it into something else that people can access, or not?
Yeah. So if we're doing, is that the question, John?
No, I was just saying that Miller's correct. The video editing that doesn't embed the things that that would have to be inside of another authoring program to get the interactivity going. But don't want to belabor it here.
Yeah, if you're looking for interactivity, what we typically use is either Articulate Storyline or Articulate Rise, pretty typically. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Then I'm going to ask you to think about how you could go micro in your content. Again, I'm not going to belabor this because you guys have already been doing much of this and thinking about it. So then what I want to do is think about getting, once you know that use case, really getting tactical. And like I said, Miller, you must have been psychic, because for me, and this comes out of our book, 5 formats for microlearning. And I think there are actually more, but we'll talk about that in a second. So we can do text-based resources. That's like how, Miller, you said PDFs, right? any of those 4 different formats of my use cases of microlearning could be done with text-based resources. We also have e-learning, to John's point, right? The things that we would develop in, say, Articulate Storyline or Rise, if we're trying, especially if we're trying to get interactivity. Then, of course, we could do standalone videos, right? Again, I've seen lots of people create portals of just videos, especially if you're doing things like software training and things like that. They're just doing demos. Infographics. A lot of people don't think about the infographic. I think it's kind of a underloved, underutilized piece, but especially as you think about performance support, infographics are really, really, really helpful. And then the last one, again, like I said, this comes from our book. And at the time we wrote the book, podcasts were all the rage. And so we put it there, but let me call that any emerging technology, right? Like for a while it was AR and VR, you know, whatever the hot new thing is, I think we can think about going micro with any of them. And so for me, the big thing as we take that all together is that actually gives you 20 different ways you can think about going micro, right? And so I'm just going to pull up my pointer here. You know, to me, this is a big thing. Like if you're doing preparation, if you're doing something to get somebody ready for a class, you can do it as text-based or send them a quick email, right? Or you can do an e-learning or a video, infographic, or whatever emerging tech chatbot or whatever, right? And the same is true for all of those 4 use cases. And so with that in mind, I'm going to ask you, as you think about the content you're creating, you've already talked about your use case a little bit already. Which one or ones do you think you would be most inclined to use? And again, keep in mind that the rows are your the rows here are your use cases. So, you know, 1 through 5 is if you're doing preparation. This row is your next use case. So go ahead, grab your annotation tools and start writing on my screen. Feel free to also drop something in the chat too.
Okay, as your host, I don't have an annotating tool. I'm not sure exactly why, but I don't. So let me just verbally say that text-based and video on a secure network for employees of dealers and stuff like that.
So you're talking about these 2 here. Which use case are you usually doing? Are you doing standalone or?
You know, it's more of support in terms of, okay, you've taken the course and you could turn to this page in this binder that you brought home with you, or you could go here to the online source and open it right here on your phone or your tablet or your computer. And more technicians have that information, or that equipment, I should say, close at hand, whether it's their phone or a tablet or a laptop.
And the AR device.
Right. And they can quickly find the resource, whether it's, you know, a table of information or written document or a short video. We're constantly coming up against the challenge that, okay, you took the course, you did this task once, that was in December, but now it's July and you haven't done it since then, so you're not quite sure. So bring up the materials, read through it quickly, and kind of refamiliarize yourself with the process and the task that you're doing, and then go do it. And so you get that just-in-time support. And then hopefully your learner gets a successful completion of the task or the activity that they're trying to do. And you know, they don't have to call over the service manager to get some help. They don't have to call a senior tech or whatever. They can do it on their own. And a lot of my audience want that. They want to be able to do it themselves. They don't want to ask for help. They hate asking for help. So having resources like this, be it text-based, video, infographic, it's all something they can easily access and will.
And to your point, Miller, I am becoming I have been for a while, a really big fan here of the performance support, because I think, you know, we do have challenges getting people to use the performance support, like finding it and using it. But once you've set up that structure that they know where those materials are and they can access them, I think we provide real value. And in fact, in that regard, I'm a really, really big fan of Bob Mosier and Con Godfredson and the work they do. And they actually say that if you lead with performance support, teach people how to use the performance support, that you can actually cut the amount of training you do in half.
And plus, you know, the performance support can be there, and in many cases it can be quickly updated, because we're in this life of the video doesn't relate to the current version of the software, so I'm lost. My wife complains about this constantly with stuff that she uses, and I'm sure it's a lot of other people get the same thing. So if you've got a quick PDF file, or you've got a short video, those two at least can be quickly re-edited and put back up so that they are current with the software. And if you can do that quickly, then your maintenance challenge of keeping your training current with what they're using and what they're doing is easier. You know, and if you're a one-man show or one gal show, that really helps. That really makes a big difference.
Well, and I think that's part of why I'm so enamored with microlearning, is that you can make those updates a lot more quickly. You can be so much more agile because you can, right? Yeah.
I think there's an important emergent attribute for the short, 5 to 10 minute type solutions, which is think about someone going through even just a 1 hour reminder course, or a course on how to use Excel, or a half-day course, right? It's a big blur to them, and they forget it all real quick because they don't get to use it all. So with a short micro-learning, you can say, this is how you do a pivot table. This is how you use columns and rows. This is how you copy things. And those become discrete performance things that then people can relate to and do a lot of the things Miller was talking about. But I think that's a different concept than showing them, instead of a 5-hour course, a 1 hour video, which merges together a string of things. I think the value of the micro-learning is de-stringing it and making it concrete events.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And let them take that sugar cube of knowledge, as opposed to this bag of sugar, and just get what they need, and then if we can get them to do that a few times, the habit will be ingrained that, oh, I'll go to our source, I'll go to our training source, or I'll go to our support source, as opposed to ask somebody or phone somebody or just sit and wonder about it, and if we can instill that in our learners, that's really powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, I am loving this conversation, but I want to show you one next piece, because I really, really want to hear what you guys think of this. So like I said, to me, okay, so you put your check mark here, and thank you for the fun comments in the chat as well. You got some things that like, this is how I would go micro, this is the thing I would make. But now, to me, the big next question is this, and I better clear all your drawings, so we're not going to see it. There we go. There we go. So then the question is, how do you make those pieces of micro-learning learner-centered? Because as we've just been saying, like, if the learner finds value, if they know what they want and they know what they're getting, then they're going to consume it, right? To me, there's this delicate balance between making something so awesome that somebody would take it even if they didn't have to, versus there's some required compliance training that we know, like, probably people wouldn't take it if we didn't make them, right? And so there's that balance. And like I said, this is the part of my work that's really my newest and my most current. So I'm looking for feedback too. So for me, the way I'm really thinking about it these days is, starting by asking, what's your goal? You have a goal as an organization to teach people something. And I think we just need to be really honest with ourselves. Are we just sharing information, or are we changing performance? And I think, of course, I would love to see us all popping our stars over here, right? But I'm also realistic. And I have done more than my share of, informational, this change is coming in the organization, or, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So first of all, go ahead, grab your Stanford tool, throw it on here, think about either a single project or kind of the majority of your work. Where do you usually land? And again, whatever tool you want to use, that's all good, however you want to stamp on here. And like I said, I've found myself kind of all over the place here in the range, but oftentimes I would say I'm probably more like around here-ish. So, I'm really jealous of some of you up over here consistently getting to do that. And thank you for the, it depends. Yes, absolutely. I'm with you. Yes. So let me show you the next part. Now, my next question for you to think about is this one, which is, what is the learner's level of motivation? Do you think that they really are excited that you're offering this training for them or not? And again, be really honest. Oh, sorry. I thought I had my tool on. Be really honest with ourselves. Because I think we often are like, oh, yes, they want this.
Okay, I'm on the high end.
All this.
My student audience has always been on the high end of motivation because,
nice.
and I've watched a young fellow in a service school class, and he was literally jumping up and down in his chair. He was so excited to be there, and that was part of the hallmark of Honda training, was that these guys just getting to the training center meant that they had to impress their service manager and the dealer principal to spend money on sending them there and feeding them and housing them for a week out of town, and also trust them that they're actually going to go there and do what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
And these guys usually didn't disappoint these people. They usually came back with a stronger attitude, a more confidence, and they would tell us this. But primarily, in the previous slide, we were always trying to change performance. We were always trying to lower the barriers so that they weren't afraid to try something new, because we'd make it less intimidating. And then we'd actually have them practice the task in the controlled conditions of the training center, where you can strip a bolt, you can break something, you put it back together wrong, and we're not going to beat you over the head with it. We're going to work with you until you've got it right, because we don't want you to leave without that experience of having done it right. But there are always going to be information pieces that are part of learning, and so we work real carefully to make sure that we just get what you need to do this task, not the history before it, not the who's famous for this sort of stuff, but just what you need to know to do this. And so you have a minimal amount of notes, if you will, in a given module, and then you have an activity to do. So you get right to the doing as opposed to the knowing.
And to your point, that's going to drive you up into this higher area, right, Miller?
Yes.
Right? Like you're going to keep the motivation higher.
Yeah, and they're really my audience with Honda technicians. They just really wanted to know. They wanted to be better.
Yeah. So what you've been saying is actually a really good segue for my next slide, which is, I think that in a lot of cases, we see that these kind of coalesce together, right? That if you are sharing information, it's probably a little lower motivation. And if you're changing performance, the learner is often more motivated, but not always, right? And so if we think of this as a single spectrum, I put them like this, but the motivation is the more important one to focus on. So I was showing this deck to a colleague just actually this morning. You know, we're still working on. I'm still working on this, and she said, "Well, but you can share information that people are highly motivated to get." And I said, "Yes, that is true." And then in that case, I'm focusing on the motivation. I also have done things that were intended to change performance, but my learner probably wasn't that motivated for it, right?
I think one of the things you need to consider, excuse me, I think one of the things you need to consider with sharing information is that you've distilled it down to the minimal amount of information that they need to learn and that they need to remember, and that you have given them some way to refresh their memory if they don't get a chance to use it. You know, it's the old analogy of walking to the middle of the wheat field. The first time you do that, you can barely see where your footsteps crush the wheat. But once you've gone back out to the side of the edge of the field and back to that point in the center of the field, you wear a path. You create a memory. And you know, I think that the thing with my audience was, hey guys, this information is important because on that hot, miserable July afternoon, when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with this motorcycle, this is going to save your butt. So remember it, pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Carla, we're coming up to about 12:45 our time, and I just wanted to make you and the group aware of that for those who have to watch their time. So I want to make sure that you get to some of the points that you wanted to make. And people put questions into chat perhaps if you have any.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah. And please add anything to the chat as we go. And Miller, what you were talking about, I think is actually a really great segue, right? Like as we think about who our learner is, then I've actually got a few tips for how do we make those pieces of content as learner-centered as possible. And so I will share those, but of course, if you need to drop, feel free. Otherwise, we can continue this discussion as well. And I'll be relatively quick so we can have some wrap-up conversation as well. So with that in mind, if you're on the low side of these, as you think about designing your microlearning, I would recommend that you really focus on that with them. Tell them why this matters to them, right? And Miller, to your point, that's exactly what you were doing, right? Sometimes I think when we're on that low side, it's that it matters to the organization too, and that's okay. Really focus on that in time investment. In just 10 minutes, you're going to learn, right? We'll give you indications of progress. You're almost done. You know, like you don't want to be here anyway, so we're going to keep this moving for you, right? And I've been working on a project recently where we're doing nudges, little like reminders by email or text, and focus that on that with them. And of course, intrinsic, extrinsic rewards, right? Some sort of completion status, recognition, prizes, incentives. You know, there's lots of things we can do to get people to eat their vegetables, right? But if we're thinking about the other side of this spectrum, people who are more motivated or more focused on performance, then my recommendations would be really focus on the learner's why, right? Why does this matter to them? And I used to, for a while, do training in a healthcare environment, and we always talked about your why, right? Why do you work here? And every clinician has a story about why they went into healthcare. And so really focus there. And also focus on the value for your time. You'll see this is a little nuance from what we would say before. Now, after just 10 minutes, you're going to be able to do whatever, right? We're focusing on that why for you, making it as mobile friendly as possible so they can engage anytime, anywhere, because these are the people who are going to do the microlearning in the grocery store parking lot or while they're waiting for their pizza delivery. The left side, they're not, right? Let's be really clear. Every time I hear people say, oh yeah, go micro, they'll do it, you know, on the train during commute. I'm like, only this group will do that.
Yeah.
And of course, those encouragement nudges focus on the why, and then enabling them to connect with like-minded learners, like peer groups or having social connections. And then I'll show you one last bit, and then we'll kind of, I'd love to hear your, actually, I'll show one more bit, and then we'll get some thoughts and feedback. So kind of overall, though, thinking big picture, regardless, as we think about your use case, I always ask myself, if I was the learner, what would be helpful to me, and provide that and nothing more. And I think this is really big. That's actually Miller and others, you've all been talking about that, right? Get it as short as possible. And then also recognizing that even really highly motivated learners want to use their time well. So that content has to be specific. We talked about like, what exactly do they need? Or when you mentioned make a pivot table, right? But it also has to be brief and interesting, right? Those would be our holy grails. And then also I tend to really focus on strong UX and graphic design. So it feels inviting, engaging, easy to use. We know that when users think something is easy to use, they're more likely to engage with it. And then thinking about those performance support pieces, place it as close to that moment of need or the moment of curiosity as possible. You know, when would they care about this? When would they want this? And again, Bob Mosier and Con Godfredson talk about the moment of need, the moment when you need this content. And I like to extend that and talk about the moment of curiosity. When would they have that moment, right? So I wanted, before I like close our presentation, I did want to ask your guys' opinion, your thoughts, because this is a part that's a little bit newer in my presentations. What are your thoughts about being learner-centered within your microlearning? Any thoughts, comments, questions, suggestions?
You know, one of the things that's always so interesting to me, you know, when we come to these meetings, we hear about very different kinds of learners, right? Honda technicians. I worked in high tech, people with computer science degrees, and, you know, a huge need to learn, but also working 10-hour days, you know, so it was like a thing they had to do. So it's very interesting for us to always consider any kind of instructional designer, right? Is like, what is really the world that person is, and what does it mean to them to learn, right? I mean, and it extends from microlearning to the biggest class you're ever going to give, right? But it's always so interesting for me to always put it in a context, and I hear different contexts in this case. It's just not microlearning by itself, but in the context of the kind of learning and what their information, knowledge, learning world is like, right?
Yeah, and I think really focusing on that learner. I think I've worked on so many projects where I've seen people get sort of lost in the content or the interactivity or what we think the learner needs, but we should be really focusing on that learner.
One of the things that we haven't talked about today is time for reflection by the learner. And you know, these are small little pieces, so that probably doesn't take very much time. But it, to me, and I learned this the hard way, trust me, asking students to think about what they learned tonight while they're having dinner or while they're watching TV or whatever, that just paid huge dividends. And I'm thinking that even though these are bite-sized chunks and stuff, we still need to ask them to reflect on it. We need to get them to think about this when they're not feeling pressured, and the subconscious and conscious mind can start to play baseball with or play tennis with the ideas. And that's when you get that deeper learning, a deeper, oh yeah, I could use that there too, that kind of thing.
And that's where a lot of the boosting stuff goes, you know, sending little text messages or chats. With folks.
And the social interaction, I think, is really another area that, hey, I just learned this thing, and you should, you know, they become your advertisers and your promoters, and that's a good thing. But some people and some cultures like learning in groups as opposed to individual learning. So if you can bridge that divide, that's a help.
Absolutely. Any other? Oh, Erwin, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Sorry. I think in a microlearning sense, the way you the most quickest way to generate reflection is to pose a question to them at the end of the discussion.
Good point. And I think that, you know, we constantly, even when we're at the share information end of it, we need to keep in mind that information is necessary for some action, to make a decision, to perform a task, whatever. And so we need to make sure that we don't just put the information out there and let it hang, but that they are fully aware that to make the decision of whether or not to do the following test, you need to know this stuff. And then it's a, oh yeah, I need to know that because I'm going to be doing that test, or I'm going to be doing that inspection, or I'm going to be doing that task. And it comes back to your WIFM. You know, it's what's in
Absolutely.
it for me. It's success is in it for me.
One of the things we tend to forget is that, especially when a lot of the micro-learning would be done in an asynchronous way, right? So they're just doing it off on their own, is the power of the rhetorical question, right? To, like Erwin says, to raise a question. And it can be, you know, you're putting out a question out there, you're not going to get an answer because it's asynchronous, but it does something to our brains. There's a reason why, you know, orators use rhetorical questions. Your brain starts to answer that question. And that's exactly what we want to have happen, to start triggering reflection, you know, to drive them into that meaning making mode, right? So
I love that.
That also gives them something to ponder when they are reflecting, is that, oh yeah, I could use that there too, or, oh, that's how it works. We found that when we taught electrical service training, which is this is the most frightening subject for technicians because they can't see it most of the time. When we taught that and we asked them to reflect on it, we asked them to share the information with the guys back at work, with their parents, with their family, everything. We got tremendous memorability in this stuff, and it really helped. And these guys just took to it like a duck to water. It was really great. And they became so much more confident and capable and confident. That was inspiring. It was really
that's awesome,
good for us.
right? And when you see yourself learning, you get engaged by that as well. Absolutely.
Yep.
Because it feeds into your WIFM and your why as well.
Yep.
For the asynchronous thing that Kathleen was talking about, what would be the best mechanism? Do we specifically ask them to write out here how you would use this concept? Them knowing that nobody's going to read this darn thing, so why are they tricking me into doing all this extra work?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I've seen people do. More recently, I've seen things with nudging, which is like your in-app notifications or chatbot messages, text messages, where we don't exactly expect them to respond. We just expect them to look and like pause and think for a moment. Or that if they respond, it's like, which of these, you know, A, B, C, or D, so it's faster. But I will also say that I actually did a project where we wanted people to reflect. And so we gave them little bits. And we said, this is the topic for your next one-on-one with your manager. And we're expecting you to do that. And in fact, what we did was, even though it was optional learning, we had close to a dozen of these little guys. And we said, if you do 6 or more, you're going to get course completion credit for this. So, and actually those questions that they were to discuss with their manager, that was the question they just had to answer on the LMS and they got credit, right? So I think there's ways we can add in that accountability, but I think you're right, John. If we just ask them and you know, there's no rationale to do it, then of course people won't. And I wouldn't either, right? All right, I know we're really close to the top of time, so I am going to wrap us up, but I'm happy to stay and answer any other questions as well. So I think in the end, you know, regardless of how you're using your microlearning, always asking how we're adding value to the learner. Because I think when we put that lens on and we think about the learner first, we make a difference in the materials we create. And of course, if you want more, I teach the ATD certificate program on microlearning. You can check out the books as well. I already have actually given a copy of this as a PDF to Miller and Kathleen, so they can share that with you guys. And then again, you know, connect on LinkedIn. If you scan that little QR code, we can become friends on LinkedIn right away. Or send me an email. I'm always happy to answer questions as well. And I just love connecting with people and talking about learning. So,
Great.
and with that, I know we've got a couple of minutes. So if there's any final questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, and I want to leave the time for those questions or comments, but Carla, before we do that, I want to absolutely thank you. I think this has been one of the sessions with the most engagement that we've had. So kudos to you for that. Thank you.
Well, and kudos to you, all of you, being at home on Zoom. This is, thank you.
Great.
Thank you for participating.
And then anybody else in the last couple of minutes.
And thanks for having me too, Kathleen. I appreciate it.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So what's new that's coming up in the micro learning world that is the future trend in it that we don't know about?
Oh, it's such a good question, Erwin. And I hate to answer because I know I'll be wrong because my crystal ball is probably pretty cloudy. But my current things that I've been seeing and working with more is this idea of nudging, sending people little bits of stuff. And I'm really enamored these days with chatbots that we could either nudge you based on your profile, or it's like, that's like performance support perfectness, right? That you have got this little thing that you can ask a question and it's going to tell you the answer. So you've got both sides to that equation.
Like Siri, Alexa, and Google, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? Imagine having Siri for your, for your work.
Yeah.
I think it's not there yet, but I think these things are not that far away.
That's actually an interesting concept of domain micro learning, kind of.
Yeah.
There's interesting tools that you can use that'd be more for the nudge, the follow-up, the booster, where questions are sent to the participants, post the session. It's really great for marketing messaging, but also for technical concepts. But questions get sent to people and they answer them, and these can be made into competitions and so forth. But then if they don't get the response, right, or the quiz, they don't get the right answer, it takes them back to the chunk of learning, the little piece of micro learning to read so they can reinforce, right? And and it's, use your cell phone, right? I mean, it's great for sales folks. Yeah.
I don't know if it's still out there, but there was a product on the market about 10 years ago called Friday Fives, which was a follow-up software program that not only included the learner, but included the other people in a course and also included the learner supervisor. And as I said, I don't know if they're still in business or not, but we looked at one course on the auto side that might use that, and I don't remember if they ever did use it or not. But it was, every Friday you'd get a message, and it goes right along with nudging, as you were saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. But unfortunately, we have ended our hour way too fast. It's been absolutely fascinating, but I need to close this off. Let me end our recording.
It's really great.
Thank you,
this was
everyone.
great.
Thank you so much for being